All right. Today we're going to talk really quickly about Jackson's first presidential run and the election of 1824, which he loses in an election known as the corrupt bargain. The Andrew Jackson was a hero of the War of 1812 and the Battle of New Orleans. He was a hero of his incursion into Florida, and so he becomes really the common man's candidate in 1824. He'll be opposed by a host of people, including John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, the who had crafted the Compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise, John C. Calhoun from South Carolina. So it is a really a veritable who's who election in 1824. Now, the 1824 election is called the corrupt bargain because there were so many candidates that the uh, the election ends up getting thrown into the House of Representatives. So if you look down here, because no candidate garnered a majority in the Electoral College, election was decided in the House of Representatives. Clay was eliminated from the running. Okay, as Speaker of the House, he influences the final decision. So Clay finished fourth. So according to the Constitution and according to the rules, he was eliminated. But Clay, since the election got thrown into the House of Representatives, Clay oversees essentially the vote for president in the House of Representatives. Well, that's kind of strange, but he will influence the election so that really the some of the people that he's associated with will end up throwing their support to John Quincy Adams. And if you notice, even though John Quincy Adams lost the electoral vote when it was first held and the popular vote by a pretty good percentage, since Clay throws his support into the House of Representatives behind Adams, the House of Representatives names John Adams as the next president of the United States. Jackson, probably legitimately so, believes he's been robbed of this election, that he's been robbed of the presidency in 1824, and he's furious. He spends the next 4 years trying his best to ruin John Quincy Adams' presidency, and he does a very effective job. So Adams is named by the House of Representatives as the next president, and he serves one term. Now, Adams was an elite. He was in a lot of ways, he was kind of aloof. He was bookish to some extent. He believed in strong government, a national government that took the lead. He had called for things like a national university, okay? And he was really, in some ways, a strong president, or he wanted to be a strong president. Now, some people kind of thought that that was over the top, that we really hadn't had a strong president that since Washington, really, perhaps, or maybe even Jefferson, that really took the reins of leadership. And so some people were afraid that Adams was going to be a president, perhaps, that was going to run over Congress or do things his own way. I told you that really the one of the biggest problems is that Adams has a lot of enemies, and they try to make him pay on the key issue, which is the Tariff of 1828. All right, it is sometimes known as the Tariff of Abomination in the South. The Southern senators like John C. Calhoun will hate it. Okay? Essentially, what was happening was the tariff was, ever since Clay's American system, had been growing a little bit. And so Adams's enemies, to sort of make him take a stand on the tariff, introduced a bill that would raise the tariff on really the a lot of different goods. The South hated it. They believed that the tariff was only going to support the Westerners or some of the business interests up north. And really, in some ways, Jackson's trying to build a coalition here and of Westerners and really the money in the North, and the South was left out, and they hated it. They believed that the tariff was going to ruin them economically, that all the goods they were going to need were going to be more expensive. It's going to be more difficult for them to sell their cotton crop abroad. And so Southerners hated it. They hated it so much that they are going to do their best to try to do away with it. So when you kind of see how it all plays out, you can see that this swath right here of western states and northern states is where the support for the tariff really was strong. In the South, nobody really liked it. So Adams will, in the 1828 election, we're just going to skip through that stuff over there. It wasn't all that important. The 1828 election rolls around, and Adams had actually pushed through and signed, or he had signed the tariff, and so it's going to become the big issue in 1828. Jackson runs a campaign against Adams that both sides you will see a lot of mudslinging, a lot of anger on both sides after the 1824 election. Martin Van Buren, who's going to become a future president, runs Jackson's campaign, and he built a coalition from the North, from some slave owners in the South, from Westerners, and essentially creates a new political party. All right, the Jacksonian Democrats, or the Democratic Party, and he will essentially run one of the first truly modern campaigns. There is a committee that oversees local and even state party units. They have mass meetings, they have parades, they have picnics. So essentially, it's a modern campaign run in 1828. There's a lot of mudslinging on both sides. All of it really comes to a head over the story of Rachel Jackson. Now, Rachel Jackson was Andrew Jackson's wife. Adams's associates find out that she had been married before. She had gotten a divorce, but there was a waiting period for divorces to become finalized. And Rachel and Andrew had actually gotten married inside of that waiting period. And essentially, what Adams's supporters are going to say is that Rachel had committed bigamy, that she had been married to two men legally at the same time. So it comes out during the election. Rachel is terribly embarrassed. It really forces them to separate and essentially really to have an annulment so that they can wait out the waiting period and then remarry. And during that time period, Rachel becomes ill, probably from depression or a nervous breakdown, and she will die during this squabble. And of course, it infuriates Andrew Jackson. So, what will essentially happen is that in a lot of ways, Jackson will blame Adams and his supporters for the death of Rachel. The 1828 election, you guys can see that Andrew Jackson commanding victory. He dominates the electoral vote, dominates the popular vote, and essentially becomes one of America's first truly popular presidents. And by popular, I mean having the support of the common everyday person. Well, that can be good and that can be bad. Okay. This Jackson coalition is also made up of common everyday people who support them. But Jackson will also be a big proponent of rewarding the people that helped him. And so many of the people that worked in the campaign, Jackson and the political party that Van Buren created will find a way for many of these people to get a job inside the government. The Jackson's faith really in the common man is also a distrust of the establishment, a distrust of privilege, which Adams seemed to embody. And Jackson really believed that the common man was the most important person in American history. When he is elected, he opens up the White House during the inauguration for people to come in and celebrate. They destroy the White House. Everybody gets drunk, and at the party for Washington, or excuse me, for for Jackson's inauguration, and they essentially destroy the White House. And many people who were critical of Andrew Jackson and start calling him King Mob, and that's what this picture over here sort of represents. That Jackson is the king of the common person and is more like a mob. Now, Jackson as president is going to be super important for us. Okay, he is going to introduce several things that are really important during his first term and his second term that we kind of have to deal with. Okay, so we will talk about that right in a separate lecture so that I can kind of deal with them blow by blow. Okay.